Hello and welcome back to my channel What If Deku 2.0. Join us as we delve into the realms of fanfiction and fantasy, bringing you the best stories and discussions. Today we're kicking off part 1 of our series, What If Deku Unlocked the Power of Sharingan? If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content in the future. The author of this story is Targetedandfiring from Archive of Our Own. All the relevant links are in the description. Feel free to say hello to the author on their profile. Now let's dive into the fanfic. It all began with a glowing child. The birth of that child was the start of a new era in human evolution, the era of quirks. After this birth, people around the globe began to develop superpowers. No one knew exactly what was causing these quirks to manifest, but before long what was once thought supernatural became the new normal. The world became a superhuman society, with about 80% of the population possessing some uncanny ability. Things weren't all great initially. The streets filled with chaos and confusion, and soon a dominant profession emerged. It was the age of heroes. With the rise of superpowers came an enormous increase in criminal activity. While governments were stuck trying to figure out how to reform laws with quirks in mind, courageous people started committing heroic acts to keep their cities safe, protecting innocents from villains who used their powers for evil. With overwhelming public support, heroes found an official place as peacekeepers overseen by the government. Those who performed the best were paid the most and received all the fame and glory. Their careers depended on their ability to stay in the spotlight. That was why, for a young Izuku Midoriya, it was obvious what his dreams and aspirations were. He wanted to be a hero, one who could save people and stop villains with a big smile, just like his favorite hero All Might. There was just one slight problem. His quirk hadn't developed just yet. Izuku and his mother had been worried when he hadn't developed his quirk along with the other children in kindergarten. He had initially been worried, but a trip to the doctors had confirmed that Izuku wasn't quirkless but just a late bloomer. Granted, that didn't inspire much hope in Izuku. Late bloomers often develop very weak quirks, and some quirks could stay dormant deep into a person's 20s or even in some rare cases, 30s. Unlike other young children his age, young Izuku was relatively more mature. His father's unfortunate death while working overseas changed Izuku's perspective early on in life. He was more silent and cynical, and had begun to pick up on things that no kindergartner had thought about, like how his mother bit her lip and stared at her purse, before putting things back on the shelves at the grocery store. The bags that were under her eyes when she woke up in the morning were telling her that she had been crying herself to sleep. Izuku couldn't blame her. He also seemed to fall into tears on some nights since the passing of Hisashi Midoriya. It had led Izuku to some startling conclusions about his home life since his father's passing. With Hisashi gone, there was no longer a stable income being provided to the Midoriya home. A man from the life insurance company had come by recently to speak with Izuku's mother, and they had received a sizable fund, but Izuku was under no pretenses that those funds would last forever. Based on how much his mother had been worrying about funds, Izuku Midoriya had likely only kept what was necessary and put the rest into a savings account for either Izuku's schooling or her retirement. They wouldn't be able to continue living with their previous spending levels. His mother would likely get a job, but she wasn't as well educated as Hisashi, therefore it was likely her job wouldn't pay nearly as much. His mother would be busy and wouldn't be able to spend nearly as much time at home. Izuku was the man of the house now and needed to pick up skills to maintain the home while his mother was at work. Finally, there was the biggest issue. Katsuki Bakugo, a young boy Izuku's age, had developed a strong explosion quirk. He looked down on anyone he perceived as weaker than him, especially those who didn't have quirks yet like Izuku. Izuku had kept close to him because they had been good friends growing up, a friendship encouraged by their mothers, who had grown up together as well. However, lately Katsuki had begun to use his quirk on those he deemed worthless, nothing, or more precisely in Izuku Midoriya's case, Dekus. It had already resulted in several burns, and if things continued, Izuku wasn't sure they'd be able to pay for the constant need for first aid supplies and doctor visits. These thoughts occupied a 6-year-old Izuku Midoriya as he sat on a playground swing. At 6 years old and without a quirk, Izuku couldn't help but bite his lip at the thought of not being able to follow his dreams or what those struggles might mean for the future of his now smaller family. Mom has been looking for work and my quirk still hasn't come in. What's going to happen to us? Izuku thought to himself. It was fair to say that the young child was dealing with a tumult of emotions. It was this distracted state that led Izuku to not realize that someone was approaching him. It was only when he felt the explosive shove from behind that he realized he should have been paying better attention to his surroundings. Stupid Deku. What did I say last time about playing on this playground? Came an abrasive taunt from a familiar voice, a smirking Katsuki Bakugo. Keikachin. Izuku called out, teary-eyed from the burns on his back. He struggled to stand back up, but Bakugo just walked over and delivered an effortless punch to Izuku's face, knocking him back down to the ground. Shut up, you quirkless loser. This playground is mine. Just cause your daddy died doesn't mean you can come and play on it, Bakugo said as he gave Izuku a hard kick. His eyes were filled with anger. How dare this worthless Deku come play on my playground? I'm gonna destroy him, Bakugo thought as he went to deliver another kick. Izuku flinched as he was kicked hard in the stomach, tears continuing to flow down his face. Why am I so weak? I wish I had my Izuku's thoughts were cut off as the world suddenly got very big. Or rather, he felt a rush to his head, and the veins around his right eye suddenly expanded. At that moment he just saw everything. He could see all around him, up to the borders of the park. When he meant everything, he meant everything. Bakugo was entirely flesh and bones, and he could even see the organs pumping on his inside, even his nerves were easily visible. His vision had gone from being only front-facing to being in a full 360-degree radius and stretching for vast distances. It was rather dizzying, but could this be his quirk? No, it wasn't just the 360-degree vision. His left eye didn't have that same ability. While Izuku had felt the veins on his right eye bulge as they seemed to carry more blood to the eye. Maybe I need to drink a lot more water to increase its effectiveness. The nerve endings on his left eye were flaring, and threatening to give Izuku a headache. Everything Izuku saw with his left eye was slowed down was the best estimation Izuku could give. No, it was more. As he stared at Bakugo, who looked like he was moving in slow motion, his leg coming closer and closer, somehow Izuku just knew that he could copy that exact motion and stance should he attempt it. As he stared at Bakugo, Izuku could even predict the angle of the kick based on how his leg muscles were flexing. Where did that knowledge come from? So the right eye lets me see everything in about a 60-meter radius and my left eye gives me hypervisual awareness while letting me copy? Yes, copy or pick up the information I've looked at with that eye, Izuku thought. Unfortunately, it didn't seem like the eyes worked together. He couldn't combine the left eye's hypervisual awareness with the right eye's all-seeing prowess. A drawback, but that was fine. Time to show Bakugo I'm not as weak as he thinks, Izuku thought as he grinned, before immediately discovering another drawback to his new quirk. While his eye could see what was going on, it didn't matter when his body wasn't quick enough to react. Yes, everything was slowed down to a fraction of a second. Yes, he could tell that Bakugo was aiming a strong kick towards his gut. However, Izuku was at his core, a 6-year-old who had never done anything to increase his body's reaction speed. To sum it up, his body was untrained and just couldn't keep up with the information flow of his eyes. It was therefore no surprise when Izuku arrived home, bruised and bloody but with a big grin on his face. He had a quirk, of course he could handle a beating from Bakugo if it meant he would finally develop his quirk. Izuku Midoriya, upon seeing the disheveled state of her son, rushed over to him quickly, looking him over with a worried look on her face. Oh Izuku, what happened? Did Katsuki do this again? Izuku asked, fetching some ointment to put over her son's burns and bruises. She was stunned upon seeing the red burns on her son's back, and the bloody lip from what seemed to be a blow to the face. Even his stomach was sporting some large black bruises. She couldn't believe just how much Bakugo had changed since developing his quirk. While his mother, Mitsuki Bakugo, could be quite abrasive and explosive, she had never been violent toward any of her friends. And wait, what was wrong with Izuku's eye? As a matter of fact, why wasn't he in tears? Izuku looked happy. Oh Izuku, your right eye? Did you injure it? She asked, surprised by the milky color of the eye. She wiped the hair from the right side of Izuku's eye to get a better look at it. The eye lacked any semblance of a pupil, or maybe the pupil had changed color and now had taken up a larger portion. On closer inspection, the pupil was a very light, almost white lavender. Huh? What do you mean, Mom? Izuku asked, confused. Since awakening his quirk, Izuku hadn't had the chance to look in the mirror, so while he knew his quirk was ocular based on the strain of his eyes, he hadn't realized that one of his eyes had changed colors. All Izuku had felt was the strain in his left eye and the bulging veins of his right eye. Izuku, your right eye, it's all pale and white, Izuku managed to force out, still surprised by the shocking condition of her son. Huh? Oh, maybe it's a part of my quirk? Izuku wondered to himself. A pale right eye? His mom was very specific about it being only his right eye. Why had his left eye also not changed with his quirk awakening? Perhaps it was because they both did two different things. While his right eye supplied the 360-degree vision, his left eye seemed to allow Izuku to perceive things more slowly and even predict what was going to happen based on what he'd noticed from how he'd been able to easily guess the trajectory and action Kacchan was going to pull off. That was very strange for Izuku. Ocular quirks were very rare, and the only hero who jumped to the top of his mind that was big nowadays with an ocular quirk was Sir Night-Eye. Not to mention that it was rather strange that his mother and father didn't have ocular quirks that even slightly would have suggested the development of an ocular quirk for Izuku. Then again, there were plenty of documented examples of late bloomers like Izuku who had developed new or radically different quirks based on the quirks of their parents. Izuku might have been one such. "Honey, you are mumbling again?" Inko said softly, her torrent of tears and worry having dispersed to be replaced with a swell of happiness. Izuku was glowing in a way he hadn't before. Where once her boy had arrived home despondent and depressed, more often since the passing of his father, Izuku looked so happy again. Inko was reminded of when they had first received the diagnosis that her son had been a late bloomer. It may as well have a confirmation to the rest of the kids his age and even to Inko that he was basically quirkless. Especially when his 5th birthday passed. Izuku had been inconsolable after being called quirkless by his classmates, and when he'd asked her for reassurance about whether he could still be a hero without a quirk, Inko hadn't been able to give her son those assurances. It was a shame she'd had to live with. Of course, a part of her understood how foolhardy it was to be a hero without a quirk. There hadn't been any quirkless hero in almost 30 years now. Most hero schools didn't accept the quirkless, so many who wanted to stop crime and be heroes took up self-destructive lifestyles as vigilantes, eventually leading to their deaths. Inko should know she'd done the research after discovering that Izuku was quirkless. Sure, there were plenty of heroes with quirks that weren't ideal for catching villains or saving people. A new mountain rescue hero group had taken to the scene, the Wild Pussycats, and 2 of their members often fought villains and rescued those in danger with just their pure fighting skill. Their quirks weren't very flashy at all. Even heroes with erasure-type quirks were often only evening out the playing field to a fight with no quirk involvement. Pro-hero Silent Touch in Korea was well known for his touch-based erasure quirk, which only had practical uses in calming down civilians who were inexperienced with using their quirks or fighting villains. Despite the handicap, he still managed to. "Mom, you're mumbling," Izuku said with a smile on his face, watching as his mother blushed bright red at her son's comment. Well, he had to get that nervous and analytical mind from somewhere. After getting over her embarrassment, Izuku Midoriya began to tear up again. This time the fountain of tears came not from the fact her son was injured, but because of her own shame. She immediately took her son into a hug, the tears cascading down even harder. "Oh Izuku, my baby. I'm sorry. When you wanted to be a hero even without a quirk, I should have supported you. I know that there are heroes out there who get by on martial arts and skill more than their quirks, but a part of me was scared. It was going to be a hard road. People would discriminate against you for your status of being quirkless. Without a quirk, the odds of you getting hurt were going to be even worse." Inko snuffled out through sobs, "But even with a quirk, people are hurting you. I've seen the burns. This is Katsuki's doing, isn't it? He's hurting you, and even now that you have a quirk, you're still hurt. I know things are tough right now, Izuku, but I promise with all my heart that I will support you in every endeavor you ask like I should have from the start. Honey, I believe you can be an amazing hero." Izuku stood stunned in his mother's grip. Tears flowed freely from his face as he hugged his mother back. The words he'd waited for all his life to hear. Someone believed that they could be a hero. His mom thought that he could be a hero. It had been a long day for Izuku. His arms and gut were bruised and burnt. His clothes were ruined. He had a black eye. Izuku Midoriya was not doing so well physically, but damn it, he had a quirk. A cool quirk that had to do with his eyes. Someone believed that Izuku could be a great hero. That someone was his mom, the same one that had crushed his dreams only 2 years prior. Shakily, his hands curled around his mother as Izuku hugged her back. The torrent of tears the two expelled cascaded onto the carpet of the Midoriya household. Only this time, for the first time in weeks, those tears were born of joy and happiness and held a powerful promise within them. Izuku Midoriya was going to be a hero. The following weeks had afforded Izuku very little time to explore the possibilities of his quirk besides playing around with the activation conditions. Inko had been serious about providing as much support as possible for her son and had quickly pulled him from school after Katsuki's latest attack on Izuku. She'd filed an incident report with the police since she had to take Izuku to the doctor to get some of his burns treated as well. However, it was put only as a minor infraction on Bakugo's file with the excuse that it was all just a little bit of roughhousing between boys that went a little too hard. This had further put a strain on Inko's relationship with her now former friend Mitsuki, who, while sympathetic with Inko's cause, wished she'd been made aware of Katsuki's attack on Izuku before having to get the police involved. For some reason, Mitsuki Bakugo was confident she could have straightened her boy out herself instead of needing things to get so official. Inko hoped that by involving the police, Katsuki would realize just how seriously he had hurt her son as well as cut down the arrogance he was starting to develop at school, where his teachers seemingly had suspiciously not kept track of Katsuki Bakugo's use of a quirk on students or his violent temperament. Regardless of the whole situation, Inko had decided that there was obvious favoritism going on in the surrounding community towards Katsuki Bakugo and her son would suffer for it if he remained in school. Thankfully, she had already been in the process of moving. Their apartment in busy Mustafu was way out of her price. While it would be easy to maintain on the funds from her husband's life insurance for a year or two, it would soon be too expensive to maintain the upkeep. Instead, she immediately began to look for a new home in a cheaper area to live and had been fortunate to find a nice little home in Chiba Prefecture, in the small fishing town of Ichinomiya, which had access to a commuter line to a few nearby resorts, where she hoped she'd be able to get a job to help maintain them instead of rushing through their savings needlessly. She'd given a public school a call that she and her son were still finalizing the moving process, but that she wanted to enroll her son for the new semester. Until then, Izuku would finish his studies at home. Thankfully, Izuku had a brilliant mind, and his good grades and clean record meant that the transition would be easy once the new school year started. She'd even found that there were a few dojos in the small town that, if she was tracking expenses correctly, she'd be able to afford Izuku to attend. She'd given him the choice of his pick of dojos and had been quite surprised by some of his selections. He'd insisted on a very traditional ninjutsu dojo. "Mom, my quirk, so far as I can tell so far, it isn't very flashy. I need to pick a style that complements it. With my white eye, I can see everything, so I have a better advantage in a fight with limited visibility. Being sneaky will help with limiting my visibility, and learning to use weapons will be super helpful as well. It's better to keep villains at a distance, and it'll mean less of a chance of villains seeing how my quirk operates and blinding me with sand or attacking my eyes." With that statement, Inko had been convinced by Izuku's first choice. The second choice that Izuku made was just as surprising for her. "This dojo is in Chiba City. I'll have to take the train line to get there, but I've read a few articles about them online. They train their students in karate, but as if they were in actual fights instead of using traditional point-scoring techniques. I've seen some videos and it's not dissimilar to some Muay Thai or mixed martial arts fights I've seen online. I know All Might is an awesome hero, but his fighting style in particular just wouldn't work for me. He has the strength and durability to go for the full frontal boxing assault he likes to use. I don't have a strength-enhancing quirk like he does, so my fighting style needs to be more adaptable. This karate dojo has got to be the one." With Izuku's choice solidified, they spent the next weeks finishing Izuku's schoolwork and packing up their apartment. Their new home in Ichinomiya was small and quaint. The weather in the small town was very nice. It was situated on the sea, and while the summers felt like it could be very humid, the town had resisted the industrialization of some of the larger cities. It was quaint, homely, and surprisingly rustic. Melon farms were the big agricultural export, so there was always a sweet fragrance in the air. Local fishermen cast off from the docks by the bay, heading out to the ocean for their daily fishing. Their new home was on the small side and quite traditional. Their little minka was situated within a small grove of trees situated on a hill just outside of town. It was a private abode, closer to the melon farms than the conveniences of town. A small wooden veranda stretched the perimeter of the home, and the scent of clean air from the tatami mats cemented the traditional atmosphere. Unlike the steel and concrete of Mustafu, their driveway was fine gravel, and a natural overhand of trees acted as the closest estimation for a parking garage. Where Mustafu was stifling and busy, their new abode was peaceful and quiet, with the only unusual sounds to grace them in the evenings being the hum of cicadas and the chirping of the occasional tree frog. Izuku's room was a little smaller than the one that he'd had at their old apartment, but it had the necessities. A small desk so he could do his homework, a futon was rolled up in the closet, and a cabinet for his books and All Might collection. It was perhaps the biggest change since they'd had to sell Izuku's old bed anyway. He was a growing boy after all, and it gave them more space for some of the All Might figurines he wanted to keep. After some discussion, he'd concluded that some of the All Might memorabilia he likely didn't need anymore. Although his mother had kept some for herself, like Izuku's favorite shirt that he had thrown up over when he was 2. They tried to get rid of the stain but in the process had turned it pink. While it had been a frustrating experience for Inko, Izuku had been inconsolable about it following the incident. She couldn't help but smile when she thought of the memory. Finally, after all the moving in, Izuku could start properly experimenting with his quirk. The first thing he did was stand in front of a mirror and take a look at his eyes. Without his quirk activated, his left eye was the usual green. Of note, the pupil and iris of his eye took up a slightly larger portion of the sclera, although it wasn't a very obvious change. The right eye, however, had gone through a much more drastic change. While his left eye at least maintained its green coloration, his right eye at first glance looked like it had gone blind. The pupil and iris had expanded to take up a larger portion of the sclera, with the iris having a thin black border that was hard to make out. The differences between the iris and the pupil were even harder to spot. Both were in shades of a light lavender that was just barely distinguishable from the white sclera, with the pupil being only slightly darker than the iris. When he activated his quirk, things got a bit more interesting. With his left eye, the activation was rather unsettling. All in the iris, except the black edge between the sclera, seemed to almost swirl was the best descriptor that Izuku could come up with, into the pupil, and a deep red color would come swirling out of the pupil to replace the green, with a single black tomo seemingly hovering just below the pupil. When his left eye was activated, Izuku's perception of the world seemed to slow down or maybe heighten. Things were seen in exceptional clarity and ingrained definition, and when he strained to perceive, he could even enhance the clarity. Izuku was surprised by how easily he could make out the hair follicles on his skin. By observing a fly on the windowsill, Izuku knew the moment before it lifted off to fly, seeing the spring of tension in its limbs the microsecond before it flew into the air. When Izuku looked at himself, he could just faintly make out blue lines of energy running beneath the surface of his skin. Perhaps, it lets me see the electrical signals running through a human body. Easy way to test that would be, Izuku looked up at the bathroom light, disheartened when it looked like a typical light, without the blue glow present within his body. So, if it's not the electrical pathways from the nervous system, what is it? Gonna need to do some research to figure that out. Despite how interesting his left eye was, there seemed to be one major downside for now. It seemed he couldn't combine its benefits with the ones his right eye provided. Perhaps after he trained his quirk some more, he'd be able to? On activation of Izuku's quirk, his right eye hadn't had much of a dramatic change. However, the veins along the right side of his face leading up to his eye had suddenly swollen large to the extent they protruded from the skin slightly. So larger veins likely mean increased blood flow and more nutrients to that area of the body. Even standing here, it kind of feels a little bit as if I just had my head upside down. There's a lot of blood rushing to my head now, but the perks are amazing. Izuku's field of vision with his right eye had expanded tremendously. It expanded through the walls, into people, out into the forest surrounding their home. Everything had a black and white coloration to it, but he could see all around himself. My range seems to have increased by a little bit, maybe more use will help train it dash. His thoughts were caught off as he noticed that his right eye had caught a glimpse of his mom in the kitchen. It was a strange experience. When he had mentally processed that he was staring at his mom, the eye almost pulsed a bit and enhanced it on her more. For a split second, Izuku got a glimpse of what his mother looked like naked, which made the young boy blush in embarrassment before the view enhanced again and he was staring at muscles and bones. It was rather strange. It was like he could change the focus on how well he could see through something. Another thing to note was that he could see the blue lines that he'd spotted earlier within himself. It was like a network of energy that flowed through the body, and while at some points it matched up with the nervous system, it seemed to flow differently to the nervous system. The blue lines wound around important organs and through muscles. As Izuku was observing, he watched the entire pathway along his mother's right arm flare out a bit as she floated a few plates over for the dinner she was making. So, these pathways are a representation of quirks inside the body. If they glow brighter when a quirk is used, well, quirks are just muscles we have to train to develop even further. Mom isn't a hero, but her quirk pathway system is much more defined in comparison to mine. Heroes must have large quirk pathway systems from using and training their quirk in comparison to children just developing a quirk or even the quirkless. Do quirkless people even have quirk pathway systems? This is all under the assumption that what I'm seeing is the representation of how a quirk expresses itself within the body. Maybe there's more information about this online? As Izuku turned off the quirk, he yelled out through the house so his mom would know that he was getting on the computer before he hopped on and started trying to find what he'd seen. Quirk pathways, Izuku said aloud as he typed, pressing one key at a time. It was slow work, but as he hit enter the articles that came up were rather disappointing in scope. Pathway to heroism, your quirk, finding the right path for your special ability, and scandal between Italy's pathway hero and France's painting hero lead to 3 arrests by GC suspected quirk trafficking were only some of the articles that came up. Let's try quirk nervous system, Izuku thought aloud, erasing his previous search result and typing another. The articles that came up this time were much more informative but were complicated reads. They almost gave Izuku a headache, which reminded him that the previous headache he'd gotten by activating his quirk had faded away. Seeing as he was mostly okay again, Izuku activated his quirk. He'd only done it to train his quirk a bit more. The more he'd have it activated, the longer he'd be able to go without developing a strong migraine. It was in this instance of activation that Izuku noticed something new with his left eye. The perception rate was still enhanced, and while Izuku's body couldn't match it, his mind could. The articles he thought he'd have to spend the next couple of hours reading? All it took was a small glimpse and they were ingrained into his memory. He could read them faster than reading at normal perception. Shocked, Izuku deactivated his quirk, surprised at the sudden wealth of information within his head. The information he remembered. Wait, information that he remembered? Holy crap. Leaping up in excitement from the new development, he wondered just how far these applications could go while also thinking about the new information about the quirk nervous system he'd read about. He activated his quirk to find his mom and rushed off to let her know about the new development, keeping it activated all the while. The quirk nervous system was entirely theoretical. It didn't exist in the traditional sense within the body as nerves and organs did. Human dissection wouldn't reveal the nervous system, although there were plenty of theories that going deeper into the decoding of the quirk factor gene might reveal more secrets about how the quirk nervous system acted. There were several sketches with theories about how the network worked, and they weren't that far off from what he'd seen when he'd looked at his mom. These pathways had been theorized to exist within specific points in the body that, when struck by the correct type of quirk, temporarily blocked access to the next point. In short, if those points got clogged up like a big large highway pileup, then it could theoretically slow down or even disable the quirk in the area of the body immediately surrounding that point. There were theories that this was how pro-hero Twilight Blaze had been killed by the villain Ichinomiya in America. Videos of their fight saw Twilight get hit in an area of the body that matched up with one of these supposed quirk points, causing his quirk to suddenly sputter to a stop. The dark flame quirk he had masterful control of had simply gone out at a crucial point in the fight. While Twilight Blaze had been stunned and continued to try and activate his quirk, Ichinomiya had merely gotten up and sliced off his arm, followed by a flurry of vicious stabs into his chest with their electric sword quirk, before fleeing the scene. Due to the nature of the video, it was quite hard to find the video on the web, and it was by sheer luck and horror that Izuku stumbled upon it. As Izuku turned into the kitchen, he spotted his mother dicing away with a knife at some herbs. He was fascinated as he watched her work with his left eye. The movements were slowed down and he could see every little minute detail, even the twitch of her muscles as she went to adjust her grip on the herbs. Wait, he had seen that movement before she'd done the action, just like with Ka Dash. No, it was Bakugo now had kicked him in the park. As he deactivated his quirk, those muscle movements suddenly felt very ingrained within him. Somehow, Izuku just knew that if he picked up that knife he'd be able to cut away at the herbs just as easily. He had to see if his hunch was correct. Mom, I think I just discovered something new about my quirk. Can I try using the knife to cut the herbs? He asked. Izuku Midoriya was surprised by her son's question, but she assumed it had only been a matter of time. Izuku had been kept very busy the last few weeks. Now that things had calmed down and they were all moved in, it made sense that he'd want to figure out what his quirk did. She'd never let Izuku help out in the kitchen. He was a bit too small to reach into the sink easily, much less the countertop where she was dicing the herbs. She bit her lip but ultimately succumbed to the pleading look her son was giving her. All right, Izuku. But I'll have to hold you so you can reach the cutting board. Come on, Izuku relented as she picked up her boy. He was getting a bit too heavy to always be carrying around now. When she was younger she'd used to float him from the ground into her hands, but that just wasn't possible anymore. With a firm grip on her son's waist, she watched in fascination as Izuku picked up the knife she'd been using to cut some parsley and started dicing away at the herbs. At first it was tentative, but she was surprised by the cutting technique. His hands were a little too small to do the fancy twirls she could do with the knife in her hand, but the dicing motion he used matched her easily and the grip technique on the parsley was good as well. If she didn't know any better, Izuku would have thought her son had been practicing with blades in the kitchen for a while now. So distracted was Izuku by her son's technique that she failed to realize when he'd cut all the parsley up. A shame, she hadn't wanted to dice the whole plant up for one meal. She'd have to find other uses for it now. Still, as soon as Izuku put down the knife on the countertop, she set her son back on the floor. So, She asked, excited to hear more about Izuku's cool quirk. Alright, so I was watching you dice up the parsley and it was in slow motion. I could make out all the movements in your hands and muscles easily. Then, when I saw the muscles in your hand twitch, I just knew that you were going to change your grip. Then you changed it. Next thing I just instinctively knew how to chop it like you were. Izuku mumbled, I think whatever I observed directly with that eye, it kinda gives me a copy of that information. Like, I was reading an article about quirk theory earlier and I was able to read it super fast. I remember every word from it. I could probably give you a lecture about it. Perfect memory. I wonder how long it'll last. Is there a time frame? If there isn't, then I think school might be a challenge for much longer. Not that it was to begin with, but maybe I can take university classes earlier than anticipated because of this. Izuku's mumble storm continued as he walked away and headed to his room, sitting at his desk and opening Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume Me. There were a few lines already written in it, but Izuku spent the next few hours until dinner was ready filling in all the new information he'd learned. It was only after dinner that he realized there was one thing missing. His quirk needed a name. He immediately began to brainstorm. It was strange, the way his quirk worked. It was almost like he had two very different ocular quirks, so maybe he should start by naming each one and then determine the overall quirk name based on what he came up with. Izuku thought about his right eye first. Giving it some thought, he decided to go with Byakugan. All-seeing white eye seemed like the perfect descriptor for that half of his quirk. Izuku thought about the left eye next. It was a lot more complex than his Byakugan. Copy eye didn't seem like enough. Red eye sounded very plain. Devil eye was too villainous. In the Izuku decided on Sharingan copy wheel eye. That left his quirk name. Although very unimaginative, he decided to go with dojutsu, Sharingan and Byakugan. It was simple and explained to everyone what his quirk was about. Satisfied, Izuku gave the journal to his mom so she could update his findings and then headed to bed, satisfied with a good day's work. Izuku made very good use of his Sharingan in the weeks before the summer break ended and fall began. He wanted to learn as much as possible about quirk pathway theory, using his Byakugan to help him in his studies as well. With his mom's permission, he'd managed to draw an accurate quirk pathway system, or at least, how the quirk pathway system traveled around in her body. Through experimentation, the quirk pathway system would glow when a quirk was being activated, glowing brighter and brighter until a strain eventually developed. Overuse of a quirk was quite common in children first learning to use their quirks, but Inko, being a grown woman, had to use a different method of straining herself. She'd rapidly pulled books to herself out of a box and onto a shelf, starting with the smallest and building up to the largest. Not only did it help with unpacking, but it was also a test of stamina as she hadn't needed to pull something so frequently to herself in such a long time. In fact, after their testing, Izuku had discovered something else. The quirk pathway would flicker when it showed evidence of being strained and then go dark for a few minutes, during which a sweating Izuku Midoriya was unable to use her quirk out of sheer exhaustion. After multiple experiments, going through multiple days, both Midoriyas had been surprised to find that Izuku could float larger things to her. A couple of bricks had been her limit before, now she could pull 10 to her at once. Her quirk pathway system had also expanded slightly. The lines were a deeper blue, easier to distinguish with better definition than they had been before the training exercise. Straining the quirk pathway system had led to the system having to adapt to more vigorous usage, and it now took twice the time as before. Izuku grew tired of using her quirk. As fascinating as these discoveries about the quirk pathway were, they had to come to a halt once school resumed. Izuku had turned 7 over the summer and thankfully was the same age as the other second graders he was with. The school was a welcome change of pace for both mother and son. For Izuku, it meant she had more time to relax. While Izuku wanted to help her son as much as she could, she hadn't expected it would mean being the lab rat in his quirk pathways experiments. Hopefully, the onset of school will give her some much-needed time to herself. For Izuku, it was both exciting and nerve-wracking. Nabu Elementary School had Bakugo, but Daisher Elementary School didn't. Izuku was hoping for the best. He wanted to make new friends. It was this nervous excitement that led him to walk into his second grade class. He'd been introduced to his second grade homeroom teacher, Hirano Kaori. She was a squat woman with obvious laugh lines on her face. Her hair was starting to grow gray, and the only distinguishable features that made her stand out were her ears, which were long, thin, and pointed. They reminded Izuku of elf ears that he'd seen in an old pre-quirk fantasy movie involving a quest to destroy a ring. The movie had been captivating, but the plot had been a little slow for the young child and he'd passed out before he could finish watching the movie. He regretted not finishing it as he stared at Hirano-sensei's ears. Hello class, I hope you've enjoyed your summer break. Please settle down into your seats while we do the morning announcements. I know it's already halfway through the year, but we've got ourselves a well-recommended transfer from Shizuoka Prefecture. Hirano-sensei began, quieting down the whole class as she spoke, before turning to Izuku. Why don't you go ahead and tell the class a little bit about yourself? Izuku nodded, before stepping forward and giving a bow in greeting. Hello everyone. My name is Midoriya Izuku. I'm 7 years old and one day I want to become a hero just like All Might. Please take care of me, he said. There was a spattering of light clapping from a few students and Hirano-sensei. My, that's a great goal to have, Midoriya-kun. Why don't you take a seat next to Kirishima-kun while I prepare our activities for today? Hirano-sensei said, pointing to an empty seat next to a boy with a set of black hair that was rather spiky on his head, who had jumped out of his chair and waved excitedly at Izuku at the mention of his name. Kirishima-kun, could you be a dear and show Midoriya around the school for the day? Yeah, of course, sensei. Kirishima replied, sitting back down in his seat and turning to look at Izuku, who had by now taken his seat next to the energetic kid. Yo. I'm Ijiro Kirishima, but Ijiro is fine by me. Dude, you were so manly up there saying you want to be a hero. What's your quirk? Mine is hardening. Kirishima said excitedly, showing off his quirk by hardening his hand. Izuku was quite surprised by this sudden introduction by Ijiro. Oh, please call me Izuku then, he quickly replied before looking starstruck as he looked at Kirishima's activation of his quirk. Whoa, that's such a cool quirk. You can be a hero with that. I call my quirk dojutsu. As you can probably guess, I'm not blind, but when I activate my quirk my eyes get enhanced. My right eye can see through walls and gives me 360 degrees of vision, and my left eye does well. So far it lets me copy stuff, enhance my perception, and lets me memorize whatever I read. I'm still figuring it all out. I only awakened my quirk a couple of weeks ago. A couple of weeks ago? Wow, that's pretty late, but it seems pretty worth it. It's an awesome quirk. You'll be a great hero with it. Kirishima replied, bouncing in his seat. Yeah. Everyone thought I was quirkless before. It's kinda why we moved. The bullying there was pretty bad, Izuku admitted shyly, wondering how Kirishima would react. He saw the boy frown and thought the worst for a moment before Ijiro spoke. Dude, that is not manly. Quirks are cool and all, but that doesn't mean you can go around being mean to those that don't have one, he muttered, almost causing Izuku to break into tears at the words. The rest of his school day was quite uneventful. Kirishima led Izuku around the school to all the places of importance. Where to go to the bathroom, the lunchroom, the playground, the library, the school office. They eventually settled on having lunch on the roof, which had a few picnic tables and was surrounded by safety fencing. It gave them a great view of Ichinomiya, and they talked about all their favorite heroes while up there. Nah man. All Might is cool, but for me Crimson Riot is the manliest hero for sure. Kirishima said, a grin on his face as he talked about his favorite hero. Crimson Riot? Oh yeah, is it 'cause he's got a hardening quirk like you do? Izuku asked, agreeing with Kirishima that Crimson Riot was indeed a good hero, just nowhere on All Might's level. Nah, it's 'cause he's a fearless hero. He always jumps into danger, even when his quirk isn't suited for the job. It's what makes him a real man, Kirishima praised, pumping his fist. Izuku couldn't help but give Kirishima a grin. Despite his eccentricities, somehow he could tell that they were going to be great friends. The two children spent the rest of their lunch break talking about heroes, before returning to class. At the end of the day, Izuku was quite happy to have made so many new friends, with Kirishima being the nicest of the lot he'd met. When Inko picked him up from school, she was relieved to see that Izuku had a smile on his face and was talking to another boy of similar age. Hey Izuku, who is this? She asked, curious to learn about her son's newest friend. Oh hey mom, this is my friend Kirishima Ijiro, Izuku said, with Kirishima giving a quick bow in greeting. Hey Midoriya-san. It's nice to meet you, Kirishima said, keeping a respectful tilt to his voice. Nice to meet you as well, Kirishima-kun. Are you friends with my son? Inko asked, curious to see if she should expect company soon. Bakugo might have ruined Izuku's chances of normalcy at Nabu Elementary School, but that wouldn't be the case here. She wanted her son to have as many friends as he could. Yes ma'am. We're in the same second grade class, Kirishima replied excitedly. That's great to hear. Have you lived in Ichinomiya long? We've only recently moved here from Mustafu. Perhaps you'd like to stop by on the weekend and show Izuku around the town? Inko asked. Oh yeah. That sounds like some fun. Can I have your phone number so my mom can talk to you about it? Kirishima asked. After the exchange of information, the two new friends said their goodbyes, Kirishima heading to the playground to wait. According to him, his mother was always about an hour late leaving work, so he usually just hung around on the playground or in the library until she arrived. As the two Midoriya got into the car, Izuku couldn't help but feel more than a bit excited. The first day of his schooling had coincided with his first day at the Ninjutsu dojo. As they pulled away from the school, they drove for several minutes into the more remote section of town. This dojo wasn't too far from their home, secluded away in some trees. Exiting the car, both Midoriyas were surprised at the size of the compound. A large stone fence blocked off much of the size of the minka. It was only after they walked past the fence did the true enormity of the compound made itself clear. A small forest led the way up to the minka, obscuring much of the garden, if there even was one to begin with. As far as Izuku could tell, the trees went right up to the house. Walking along the path incurred a sense of foreboding to Izuku. It felt like he was being watched. He now walked alone, his mom saying that the instructor had been firm that only the trainee could enter the compound properly, so she decided to wait in the car. The shadows of the trees, the way they loomed over him, the way they sending whistled, it was all spine-tingling. A creak of a far-off branch caused Izuku to freeze. He wasn't alone. He snapped his head in that direction but only saw a slight shadow running deeper into the forest. Instantly he activated his quirk, spotting a person dressed in a shinobi shizuku watching his movements, but not from the direction of the sound. While the sound had come from Izuku's right, the person watching him was on the left side of the trees, camouflaging expertly with the foliage and shadows that only his quirk pathway network was the reason Izuku could see him. Calming down, Izuku continued on the path to the dojo. Eyes watching the right side of the path for any sound while using his Byakugan to keep tabs on the ninja watching him. He was almost to the door when he saw the ninja reach into a pocket and pull out what looked to be a few throwing stars. It was an action that took only half a second, but Izuku knew what they were for. As the throwing stars flew out of the man's hand, he hit the floor. With a thud, Izuku heard the sound of the stars hitting the door and then thunking to the ground. None of them pierced the door. They were all rubber. In the split second it took him hesitating to get up and flee from his attacker, Izuku had failed to account for the ninja attacking him. Instantly he was bound in metal wire, making it impossible to move very much at all. Interesting quirk. I knew I had been spotted after I caused that noise in the forest, but your reaction time to me throwing these rubber stars was adequate. Good instinct, kid, a gruff, older male voice spoke. Izuku looked up at his assailant, surprised that the man who had taken him down looked to be in his 90s. The metal wire slackened around him as the old man pulled down his face mask and looked him over. The name is Kamihara Shin. I'm the master of this dojo. You'll be my newest and last student for a while. That's the one criterion I have for students. If they can make it to the door without taking a hit, I'll teach them what I know. Dumbfounded, Izuku just watched the old man stroll into his home. He stopped when Izuku didn't immediately follow him. Come on, kid. It's impolite to keep your elders waiting, he called out lazily. Right, sensei. Izuku replied, getting his bearings and hurrying after his new teacher. Kamihara Shin was an interesting old man. Ninjutsu had been passed down through his family for generations. Kamihara Sensei's family were trained ninjas since the time that the Satomi clan ruled the Boso Peninsula. They carried out assassination, infiltration, and espionage on orders of their shogun, and maintained their traditions in the event they were ever needed once again. With the fall of society, much of old Japanese culture was lost, but the Kamihara clan had managed to remain isolated and now used their ninjutsu to train heroes. Now you're 7 at the moment. Your mother has been adamant that you wish to pursue a life in heroics. I would like an explanation of all the facets of your quirk, Kamihara said, voice stern as Izuku nodded and got onto the training mats. I call my quirk dojutsu Sharingan and Byakugan. My right eye is a Byakugan. It provides me with an increased field of vision in 360 degrees, that goes through walls and can even go as far as to allow me to see the internals of a person's body, Izuku said, receiving a nod from Kamihara as he took in the information. The Sharingan, it enhances my perception of whatever it can directly see. Everything moves slower, I can predict actions based on muscle movements, and provides whatever I see to me as both photographic and muscle memory. Interesting, Kamihara said as he rubbed his chin in thought, before looking at his student. Midoriya, I've gotten an edge-shot figurine somewhere in this house. Use your Byakugan to find it. Izuku was startled by the command and gave a firm nod. Taking a breath, he activated his quirk. The moment his quirk activated, Izuku began to take in all his surroundings. However, he noticed something. Kamihara-sensei's body was being watched by his Sharingan, and his sensei was tensing. He saw the action before it happened, He reached across to a wooden training katana and leaped to his feet with an ease that shouldn't have been possible on such an old body, before sprinting at Izuku. The Sharingan saw him coming from a while away, but in real time the movements were almost too quick. It took all of Izuku's will to move his body away just in time before taking a hit. Good, now move quicker. Your quirk allows me to see me coming, but it seems your body can't quite keep up, can it? I'll continue attacking until you've found that figurine. You'll need to split your focus now, Midoriya, Kamehara cackled, and Izuku couldn't help but sweat drop at his sensei's energy. However, he kept light on his feet, while he continued to scan all around with his Byakugan. A sharp pain almost caused him to lose concentration, as his arms were whacked by the sword that Kamehara had swung at him. Move faster, Midoriya. Yes, sensei. Midoriya replied, stealing his gaze and moving even more quickly. Izuku stayed light on his feet, dodging, rolling, and diving before finally finding that figurine. Master bedroom on top of your wardrobe, he gasped, trying to catch his breath. Kamehara gave Izuku a grin as he loaded his katana. Good, I wasn't even moving as fast as these old bones allow, but you managed to avoid quite a few hits. Izuku was horrified by the fact this man could move even faster. Listen up, Midoriya, the first step with your training will be using that technique of yours to copy how I move. You won't be able to go as fast as me, but you had to have noticed that I hardly made a sound. Ninjas were stealthy assailants in the night. You'll need to step in a certain manner to emulate that stealthiness. Then I'll talk to you about the 4 forms of jutsu you'll learn under me. Each time we meet, we'll focus on one part of the 4, until you reach a level of mastery and skill where all 3 will be used in our lessons, Kamehara said to the panting Izuku. First there is Genjutsu. This aspect of ninjutsu focuses on how to mess with our opponent's mind. Why do you think warriors of old went into battle dressed as demons? It was to inspire fear. Messing with emotions and our enemy's senses are all part of being a good ninja. We remain balanced while unbalanced our opponents. Then there is Kuji-kuri, the mental aspect of ninjutsu. This part is more focused on balancing ourselves. Using the philosophy of hand seals to aid in our meditation and preparing for missions and battle. Next is Bukijutsu. Ninjas of old used various tools for infiltration, espionage, and assassination. I will show you how to wield ninja weapons, use a disguise kit to make you look like an entirely different person, and what each other tool we ninjas tend to have at our disposal is for. Finally, there is Taijutsu. This focuses more on training the body and the different forms we use in fights, as well as conditioning the body for stealth, flexibility, and agility. You might find this surprising, but some of the first things I'll be showing you is parkour, to teach you how to move around the natural environment easily while keeping your momentum. Izuku was surprised by all there was regarding ninjutsu but nodded eagerly. He was prepared to learn it all if it meant that he could be a great hero someday. Alright, sensei. I'm ready to begin, Izuku said, pumping his fist in excitement. Nope. Not today, Kamehara spoke, almost causing Izuku to face fall to the floor. Today was just to check to see if you were even worthy of being a student and to introduce ourselves. Our time is almost to an end on that as well. Instead, take a practice GI home with you. Next time come with a GI and a gym bag. I have a changing room you can use so you don't have to get your regular clothes all dirty. Alright then, sensei. I'll see you again in 2 days, Izuku said happily, excited that he'd been allowed to train under the guidance of the man. Very well then, Midoriya, Kamehara said, a grin on his face as he watched the youth run off, GI in hand, and out the door he went. With a sigh, he turned towards the depths of his home and walked until he reached his bedroom and opened the door to the inside. His phone was resting on his desk, with a new notification blaring on the home screen as he opened it. Kamehara Shinya, so? How'd it go? Kamehara Shin, he'll do. Only managed to hit him once when I was testing how good his quirk worked. And boy does he have an awesome quirk. Kamehara Shinya, oh? Kamehara Shin. Yeah, the kid's got magic eyes. Can scout out a whole house while splitting his attention and seeing, and probably copying, all my attacks as they come before I hit him. The only reason I hit him at all is cause his body can't keep up with what he sees at all. Kamehara Shinya, interesting. Kamehara Shin. Hey, the brat is just 7, you can't possibly be considering. Kamehara Shinya. Of course not, maybe in a few years he'll be ready then. We always could do with another junior intern at my agency. Kamehara Shin. The kid hasn't even survived a year of my training and you're already talking about recruitment. Kamehara Shinya. Do you think he will? Kamehara Shin. Kamehara Shinya? Kamehara Shin. Ugh, yes, brat. Kamehara Shinya. Point to me then. Now what do you want for dinner? Kamehara Shin. Whatever's good. With an exasperated sigh, Kamehara Shin couldn't help but look up to his wardrobe and give a fond smile at the edge-shot figurine displayed there proudly, the simple autograph on the base plate of the figure sparking quite a bit of joy within the older man as he looked it over. Life continued for Izuku Midoriya at a normal pace for the next several years. Under the advisement of Kamehara-sensei, he decided to postpone joining the karate dojo he'd been interested in. Students were expected to have a bit of martial arts training already before attending. The dojo served as a way to help people who already had some knowledge of martial arts to apply it in a day-to-day brawl or situation. After looking up some videos of the dojo, he could see that the publicized events, where students fought students, did indeed include more than what was typically offered through karate instruction. Kid, you made a good choice of dojos. My taijutsu will show you the forms of a few well-known martial arts: Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, Wrestling, and Karate. However, I don't have any other students for you to learn how to use these styles practically in the field. A couple of years training with me and you'll be able to go toe-to-toe with the new entrants at that dojo. Sensei, I understand why I might need Karate, Judo, and Muay Thai, but why Wrestling and Jiu-Jitsu? Izuku had asked. With Karate and Muay Thai, you can keep your enemies at a distance and counteract with your whole body when there is an opening. With Judo, you'll be using their strength against them. However, what happens if a villain gets the drop on you? Next thing you know, you're on the ground. Your best attacks with Muay Thai and Karate? Gone. With your enemy on top of you, there is no momentum or strength to redirect. Judo becomes useless too. Therefore, you must know how to survive on the ground, how to escape a grapple or two-cell on the floor, and how to incapacitate a villain with a hold. You may think hero work is glorious, but sometimes it'll be either you or the villain. When that happens, Midoriya, don't be afraid to break an arm. Chokeholds are discouraged by the Hero Association, but in a life-or-dead battle, you do what you need to survive. No hero is infallible, not even All Might. They ended that session early. Izuku was distraught by the idea that his favorite hero, All Might, had been forced to kill. Arriving home, he looked up villain deaths caused by heroes and was surprised by the statistics. In events where heroes were met with deadly force by villains, 40% of villains were killed, and of the remaining 60%, only 10% were captured without injury to themselves. Heroes with flashier quirks or quirks more destructive in nature often had higher kill counts. All Might had one on his record, although records of the villain he had killed were almost impossible to find. Online forums speculated widely about what it might be, from accidentally killing someone when he was young and his quirk acted out, to a government conspiracy about an underworld boogeyman. Each theory was as outrageous as the next, unfortunately, so Izuku wasn't sure what to believe. Heroes like Endeavor had higher kill counts, in the double digits actually, but most of those were easy to track down, although only 3 of those deaths occurred at the scene of the crime the villains were committing. Burns became easily infected, and the severity of the burns Endeavor inflicted often meant those who were killed didn't die right away or in a very painless manner, often dying from the infection that set in while in recovery. Still, it had been an eye-opening experience for Izuku, who had taken Kamehara-sensei's words a lot more seriously from that point on. Kamehara-sensei was a rigorous sensei. When meditating, he would ask Midoriya introspective philosophical questions or present him with moral dilemmas. The moral dilemmas were more complicated ones to answer. They would usually be presented when Izuku was in the deepest throes of his meditation. According to Kamehara-sensei, Izuku needed to be able to quickly think about what to do in a high-stress situation while remaining in balance with himself. Some of these moral dilemmas got Izuku to think about what he could do to be a better hero. As he got better at navigating the moral dilemmas, they eventually evolved into high-stress scenarios. Villain attacks where large amounts of civilians were in danger and how to navigate them with the least amount of casualties, scenarios where he was taking on multiple villains at once, scenarios where he was caught in an infiltration mission, and many more. Izuku had to navigate them while trying to keep an internal balance between his rational thoughts and his emotional responses. It was tough for the 7-year-old to admit that he wouldn't be able to save everyone if they were in danger from a villain, and unfortunately for Izuku, he had tried to at first in many of his scenarios. Midoriya, you do not have the strength and speed of All Might. You do not have the firepower of a strong hero like Ryuku or Endeavor. Nor do you have the same versatility as heroes like Hawks or Edgeshot. Play to your strengths. Your Byakugan can scout out battle zones for civilians a lot more easily than any of the heroes I just mentioned, while your Sharingan will be good for dealing with villains who are on the slower side, at least until you get your speed up. Other than that, Izuku found that he quite enjoyed Kuji Kuri. He practiced the meditation at home before bed, and it had helped with keeping any bad dreams away and helped him sleep a lot easier. The hand motions, while Izuku initially failed to see their benefits, he noticed began to help build the dexterity of his hands and fingers, allowing them to stretch in ways he wouldn't have been able to imagine before. These daily practices of hand signs proved invaluable when they started taijutsu training. Taijutsu training was much more rigorous. It didn't involve a lot of sparring, at least not at first. First, it was just learning how to fall correctly, using the momentum of your fall to carry you to your feet or to reduce the impact. Then balance and flexibility were focused on. At one point they even went to a trampoline park and got Izuku to practice maintaining coordination while flipping through the air. From there it escalated to learning how to navigate an environment, and parkour was added into the mix. Rolling to reduce the impact of a jump, efficient navigation of the environment during a chase, wall running to go up walls or travel along them to clear obstacles or gaps, and even jumping onto precise locations at a distance. Even quick thinking and reaction speed were improved upon. It was only when Kamehara-sensei deemed him adequate that he started to be shown forms. With his Sharingan the forms came very easily. Izuku was shown once and he could replicate them perfectly. Thus, when they began to spar, there was a focus on application instead of technique. The Sharingan gave Izuku great technique, but the application was foreign to the young boy. He'd never been in an even fight before, he didn't consider Bakugo beatdowns to be even fights at least. Therefore the spars helped Izuku learn how to use the forms. Frequently, Kamehara-sensei would get his busy grandson to come and spar with him. Kamehara Shinya was a nice young man in his mid-20s. His hair was silver, but Izuku suspected it was that color by design and not due to his quirk or age. Shinya-sensei had an easygoing sense about him, often arriving late to a session with grocery bags in hand. He worked in Tokyo proper and only occasionally visited his grandfather, which explained why he was often absent. Izuku suspected he was a pro-hero but couldn't tell just who it was. The quirk pathway system was fairly developed, more so than even Kamehara-sensei's, suggesting constant use and extensive quirk training. Shinya-sensei, as he had insisted he be called to differentiate himself from his grandfather, was a skilled master of ninjutsu who always managed to get the drop on Izuku when his Byakugan wasn't active. He was quick, nimble, and exceedingly fast in such a way that Izuku wasn't quite sure if he had some sort of enhancement quirk. He suspected it wasn't the case, as Kamehara-sensei's quirk was something called 2D image, which let him flatten his body onto a 2D surface as long as that object had a large enough surface area to contain his body. It was a pretty awesome stealth quirk that came with Midoriya focus. Shinya-sensei barked as he threw a punch that Izuku had to struggle to dodge. During spars he wasn't allowed to use his quirk most of the time. The reasoning was sound to Izuku. His dojutsu, while an amazing quirk, was limited in the sense that it skewed Izuku's sense of perception. If Izuku grew used to fighting with only his quirk activated, he'd struggle in situations when he was blinded or couldn't keep his quirk activated for prolonged periods. It was better to have his body build up its natural speed, before including the benefits the Sharingan granted in terms of Izuku's enhanced perception. Izuku found a lot of the fighting styles to be a bit more unnatural for him. By his nature he wasn't very confrontational, choosing a more defensive fighting style focused on evasion and quick hits to wear down the opponent, before finishing when a decisive opening appeared that allowed for a big hit. Bukijutsu training was a different experience for Izuku. He was unsure if using weapons was ideal for a hero, and he even brought it up with Kamehara-sensei. Listen kid, just because you have a sword or a knife in hand, doesn't mean you have to resort to deadly force with it from the start. Use that head of yours and think for a moment. A knife is a good tool to have in hand to put villains on the defensive, and there are plenty of places on the body that won't kill someone right away. Know where the major arteries and internal organs are and you'll be able to use them effectively on a villain without going for the brutal option from the start. Not only that, but a knife is a handy tool just a general, helping you escape bindings or cut away pieces of the environment might need to make use of in a survival situation. Bukijutsu was a large category to cover. The first thing they began with was focusing on human biology. Where the internal organs were, where the major arteries were, and which locations were susceptible to blunt force trauma. They even covered how to treat different types of wounds, how to apply basic first aid, and even resuscitate someone with CPR. This helped alleviate Izuku's worries about using weapons somewhat. After that came Shuriken Jutsu. They spent quite a lot of time on this section. Izuku was taught how to handle a kunai, which functioned very similarly to a dagger, how to throw one accurately, and even ways to use it in survival situations. He learned to throw shurikens and hyperdensity seals as well. Izuku ended up preferring the shurikens to the hyperdensity seals. The seals were a pain to carry around, and until Izuku built up some strength they were harder to throw as well. Sure, Shinya-sensei had shown him how powerfully hitting a strong hit could go with them, but they lacked any way to manipulate them after they were thrown. They were hard-hitting, but their trajectory varied little while in flight, always a straight line that was difficult to manipulate with anything other than ninja wire. Shuriken in comparison were much easier to manipulate, and with his Sharingan, Izuku was easily able to chain multiple shurikens to bounce off each other in midair to hit other targets, or even act as an improvised bola with some ninja wire. When given the choice between Kenjutsu and Bojutsu, Izuku decided learning the bow staff would be more applicable to hero work. There weren't very many situations in hero work where a sword was applicable. A bow staff was safer to use when taking down villains, and Izuku was already brainstorming the additional features he could incorporate into one. It wouldn't be a stretch to have a taser on the ends of the staff or even have a bow staff that, with some clever engineering, could swap into a pair of tonfas. He'd certainly seen crazier support items for heroes. Granted, Izuku had to learn the tonfas at home and on his own time, as they weren't traditionally used in ninjutsu. For his genjutsu training, Izuku was surprised by some of the tactics he was trained in. He was shown how to operate circuit breakers to cut the power in a building, cutting off the sense of sight in the process for villains. How to mix medicines and poisons that were tasteless and would knock a person unconscious, utilize explosions to affect someone's hearing, glue traps, and slimes to mess with their sense of touch, and even smell was used as a weapon. Fragrances that would make him come off as approachable, or scents that could hide his scent from those who were following him. The final bit of genjutsu training involved messing with a person's emotions. Izuku had to learn to analyze people's personalities for emotions to exploit. People who are angry or facing inner turmoil and self-doubts are not balanced Midoriya. Maintain your balance and skew the balance they try to maintain. Even if you must say something hateful to provoke or cruel to discourage. Once the enemy is unbalanced, they have let their emotions control their actions. No longer will you be facing an opponent of sound mind, no, it will be a fight of beast and man, Shinya-sensei had said, after a spar where Izuku had given in to his frustrations. The final bit Izuku was taught was infiltration and espionage. There will be times when villains will organize or are covering their tracks very well. In these cases, you may be forced to go undercover kid. Just being around them might net you some good information, but the real gold mine is going to be on their devices. A lot of that is password protected, but with a good brain like yours, learning to hack should be no issue. Of course, you gotta make sure to hide your identity as well. Shinya will teach you all about that. I'm too old to be putting on makeup, Kamihara-sensei had said when they reached this portion of the training. While Izuku's training was rigorous, his life revolved around more than just getting stronger. There was school after all. Izuku and Ijiro were thick as thieves. While they both took their studies seriously, Izuku more than Kirishima, they knew how to have fun as well. The two boys were very well liked by the staff at Daishire Elementary, and Izuku was surprised to find himself being one of the popular boys. He'd blushed tremendously when he received a few Valentine's Day chocolates. Most were obligatory, of course, but one had been left on his desk from a secret admirer, and it had been well made as well. This had sent the rumor mill going crazy for a few weeks, especially since no one could tell who had given the chocolate to Izuku. While Izuku was quite young, he still knew the significance that such chocolate meant. Someone, probably a girl, liked him. Liked him. It was quite surprising, and though he'd asked around, he'd never figured out just who had placed the chocolate heart on his desk. Kirishima, for his part, had simply grinned and exclaimed, "Dude, whoever left you this chocolate, they've got to be super manly." At this moment, Izuku could have sworn he heard an eeped sound from the hallway, but when he glanced over, he hadn't seen anyone standing around or walking by. When the chocolate hearts continued to appear over the years, Izuku knew that they had come from the same person, but had failed to figure out just who was giving him these hearts. All he knew was that they were always on his desk when he arrived at school each Valentine's Day. One day, Izuku had decided to make his own chocolate heart. It was rather abnormal, as the girls were the ones who usually went through the effort of giving out the hearts. However, he was determined to thank the person who had held such strong feelings throughout the year, especially since it was their final year in elementary school. Before leaving for school the day before Valentine's Day, he'd taken out his heart and left it at his desk. If the pattern held, then in the morning the person who had made the hearts would see it as they dropped it off. He left a tiny note on top of his parcel. "To my secret admirer, I admire you too." While Izuku had never met the person who made the hearts, he could respect that they had gone through all the effort to make those chocolates, without asking for anything in return. Sure, he was a bit too young to be interested in anyone romantically, but it just felt right that he should leave such a note behind for his admirer. In the morning, he found his gift had been received. With a simple, "thank you," scribbled on top of his latest gift. Izuku knew that with his Byakugan he could identify who had received his own chocolate heart, but had ultimately decided against it. This person was taking their time in approaching Izuku and he could respect that very much. Besides, he would lie to himself if he admitted that he didn't enjoy the suspense that built each year his admirer went undiscovered. Izuku would wait until their confidence grew enough to approach him. Izuku and Kirishima were hanging out on one busy autumn evening, Kirishima having been allowed to sleep over for the weekend. He'd carried a worried expression and had been taking glances at Izuku from time to time, obviously wanting to talk about something with his best friend but unsure how to bring it up. It was only after the third time that Izuku had decimated him in a video game they were playing that Izuku finally broke the tension. "Eiji, you're worrying me. 3 straight rounds against your main and you're playing about as well as if it was the first time you'd picked up the controller. Tell me what's up?" Izuku asked, curiosity and worry highlighted on his features. Kirishima, for his part, sighed as he put the controller down and flopped onto his back. "Dad got a promotion," Kirishima finally spoke, his voice in a weird tilt. "Really?" "Kirishima, that's great," Izuku exclaimed in happy surprise before being cut off by Kirishima's next words. "His company is offering a sweet deal on a high-rise in Shizuoka. We're moving during the winter break. I'll be going to Mustafa Private Middle School at the beginning of next term," Kirishima said, voice expression the dejection he felt. Ijiro and Izuku were both as close as brothers and to heart that they wouldn't be going to middle school together was crushing both Ijiro up inside. "What?" Midoriya asked, confusion apparent on his face as it took him a few seconds to comprehend the life-changing sentences his best friend had just spoken. "Yeah, same," Ijiro said, giving a humorless chuckle in response. The boys sat there in silence. Kirishima was waiting for Izuku's reaction. Izuku was sitting there contemplating. "It isn't ideal, but we may be able to meet up again on the weekends. I'll be heading into Chiba City to a new dojo come springtime on the weekends, so maybe we can meet up then? It's not ideal, but we can make it work. Our moms already have each other numbers, and Mom was talking about getting me a phone as a middle school present, so we can keep in contact and talk on the weekends." And Izuku's rambling was cut off, as Ijiro placed a hand over his mouth. An apologetic look came over Izuku's eyes as Ijiro looked at him, stupefied by the information Izuku was expelling. "Wait, you're not sad?" Kirishima asked, a look of confusion coming over the other boy's features. "Eiji, of course I am. I won't get to see the one person I can call brother every day anymore. You're my best friend, and it's going to suck not having you in my middle school classes, but there's still plenty of ways to keep in contact with each other. Shizuoka is a far train ride but not an impossible one. I'm sure Mom will let me come over every other weekend or something. A little distance won't tear down our friendship. I promise," Izuku declared as Ijiro removed his hand. Kirishima looked at Izuku quietly for a few moments, before tears started leaking from his eyes and down his face. Kirishima stretched over and hugged Izuku, as he cried into his friend's shoulder. Have I told you just how manly you are, Izu," Kirishima said as he pulled away, wiping the few stray tears left on his face away. "Only once or twice today. It's how I knew besides your terrible gaming that something was wrong," Izuku readily admitted with a cheeky laugh. Kirishima couldn't help but bark out a laugh as well, giving Izuku's shoulder a soft punch as well, before the two returned to their gaming. Their worries soon being left forgotten as they returned to their gaming. The two friends were sure that nothing would split their friendship apart. Izuku ducked a kick sent at him by Shinya-sensei. This was his first ninjutsu lesson since his talk with Kirishima, and he wanted to go all out in a spar. Shinya-sensei had allowed the use of his quirk and had come at Izuku with a ferocity that Izuku hadn't been expecting, but their training had been paying off. It was obvious that Shinya-sensei wasn't moving at full speed. Those attacks were usually unavoidable. However, the speed he was moving was challenging Izuku. Sweat poured down the boy's face as he took in the 2 jabs Shinya-sensei was prepping, only moving his body aside in the nick of time as they brushed past his hair. It was strange to imagine that a blow like that a year ago would have hit him. Taking advantage of the opening, Izuku had moved in on Shinya-sensei's exposed side, delivering a strong sidekick that put his teacher on the retreat. Shinya gave Izuku an approving nod before he sent a right cross at Izuku, but the tensing muscles in his legs meant a kick was inbound, so it had to be a feint. As Izuku readied himself to reposition away from the kick, the expected kick never came and he was punched in the face instead, it likely being thanks to the headgear they were wearing that he wouldn't bruise. "Those eyes can still be tricked, Izuku, stay alert," Shinya-sensei barked as he gave Izuku time to recover. Izuku spent a few seconds panting on the ground, feeling frustrated that he'd let himself get caught by the double feint. He had to get stronger, he couldn't stay down. It was just him now. With Kirishima gone, soon I'll be alone again. I have to be strong so that no one calls me useless again. The determination to keep fighting, the frustration in his weakness, the desperation to never be called useless again, and the utter love he felt for his brother and all but named Kirishima had mixed into a potent cocktail. One that Izuku would later be unable to explain. At that moment, the veins around his Byakugan swelled a little more, while a second tomo wheeled out of his Sharingan. It was a slight change, not immediately noticed by the older instructors, nor had Izuku even realized anything had happened. At that moment he just knew that he was stronger. He launched himself at Shinya-sensei, whose movements had become almost slow to Izuku. The tell of his actions was more obvious and broadcast to Izuku in a way that he saw Shinya-sensei's attacks coming seemingly an eternity before they happened. Izuku let out a roadhouse kick to put his sensei on the defensive, before closing in to deliver a quick jab. While he wasn't moving any faster than usual, the newfound confidence he gained as he attacked, and the ease with which he was able to dodge, had surprised Shinya, leaving an opening for Izuku to exploit. Shinya ducked to the side to avoid the jab, and let out a startled gasp as a slight graze tore and numbed up his brachioradialis. At the exclaim of pain from his teacher, Izuku backed off, worried as for the first time he noticed that the quirk pathway system in his hands had been flaring up when they hit his sensei's arm. As he studied his sensei's arm, he noticed that the quirk pathway system wasn't circulating the same energy as freely as before. Shinya for their part was more surprised than hurt by the attack. His arm was already starting to bruise, but he'd honestly received worse injuries in his day job. The pain from this strike was nothing in comparison. Relax, Midoriya. Just some bruising, I've had worse, Shinya said, trying to get his student, who looked on the verge of tears, to relax. But sir, your quirk pathway system. I think I heard it. Izuku exclaimed, looking ready to bawl. Shinya couldn't help but look into his student's eyes, confused by what he meant by that. Quirk what no dash. Whatever Shinya had been about to say was cut off as he noticed the change in his student's eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. His Byakugan had the veins around it swelling much larger than before, and the Sharingan had another tomo. Midoriya? Yes, sensei? Congrats, you've undergone a quirk awakening. Quirk awakenings were rare. They were usually the hidden potential of a quirk revealing themselves during moments of extreme stress and life-threatening danger. Therefore, a simple dojo spar shouldn't have resulted in a quirk awakening. It didn't make any sense. Izuku's life hadn't been in danger in his spar with Shinya-sensei. While he was feeling a bit stressed out that his friend was moving away and had been high on his emotions during the spar, it wasn't comparable to the extreme stress that the rare people who underwent a quirk awakening experienced. The visit to a quirk therapist after practice had confirmed their thoughts. It just wasn't comparable. If people awakened their quirk every time they were emotional, they would be happening all the time. The therapist had therefore come to a conclusion based on what Izuku had told him about everything leading up to his quirk awakening. Izuku's quirk must naturally undergo small awakenings over time, or perhaps when he felt a strong emotion similar in scope to the ones Izuku had felt during that spar. Either way, the therapist had concluded that another quirk awakening, while unlikely, was possible in the future, and that his office was always available to help train the new abilities quirk awakenings could generate. As far as Izuku could tell, his Sharingan's perception and analysis abilities had improved by leaps and bounds. When testing his quirk out against Shinya-sensei, he could see the way his muscle had first started to flex, then contract, use of the contraction to determine the angle of attack, all before the limb had even actually moved in real time. Even the feints that he'd tried dodging before were less obvious. Things as simple as eye movements were factored in when making predictions. Advanced stances that he'd struggled to mimic were suddenly easily copied by his quirk as well. The eye now held 2 tomos orbiting the pupil, which was the only change physically Izuku had noticed since first awakening his quirk. Unlike his Sharingan, his Byakugan hadn't changed much. Over the years, Izuku had upped his range of viewing to half a kilometer, but the quirk awakening hadn't seemed to increase his range any more than it had before. Instead, Izuku had picked up changes with his quirk pathway system. It had seemingly advanced itself. While before, the system had traveled through his body naturally, there seemed to be points along the system that were easier to see, not just for himself but for others as well. Since Izuku couldn't find any substantial reading on the web, he decided to call them tenketsu. Interestingly, some quirk energy inside Izuku could be expelled through these tenketsu. It did result in a slightly burning feeling and put a larger strain on his eyes the longer he held up the expulsion of quirk energy, but the quirk energy that Izuku could expel seemed to have various strange properties. With the help of the therapist, They discovered that the quirk energy would flare harshly against non-native quirk energy, attacking the source viciously. Like a white blood cell, it seemed to recognize which quirk energy was Izuku's and which quirk energy wasn't. It was likely what blocked up Shinya-sensei's quirk temporarily during their spar now that Izuku thought about it. It also meant Izuku had to be cautious about how he used it in a fight. Testing out strikes with quirk energy-infused palms and kicks had resulted in a training dummy losing its head, and had almost put a trainer in the hospital when Izuku had struck past their scaled armor quirk and ruptured their internals and quirk pathway system. Against people, his quirk had lethal implications, but the quirk therapist seemed pleased that Izuku was already involved in a form of physical activity. He had stressed that Izuku not partake in any spars using quirks until he had a better hand at preventing the quirk energy flare-ups. It also had the potential to possibly act as a mild full-body strength-enhancing quirk, as while Izuku had put in a lot of work before, the last thing he wanted was to kick someone's head off in a real fight. Thus, Izuku spent the winter training his control and meditation. He would focus on meditating before doing some shadow boxing with his quirk activated, focusing on internalizing the quirk energy that had seemed desperate to flare out of his body. It was tough, as Izuku had to fight hard with himself not to be discouraged when he would step forward to kick and jump a meter forward instead. It was only thanks to his teachings from Kamehara-sensei and Shinya-sensei, along with the support of Kirishima, that Izuku was able to continue as well as he did. When Izuku wasn't at the dojo or home, he made sure to visit with Kirishima. The two friends could feel the anticipation leading up to the upcoming move, the phone calls with Banks Ijiro's parents were making, the moving boxes being brought in to prepare for the move in the spring, and even the sale of unwanted items that were no longer needed in the new home they were going to. The two families decided to celebrate Christmas together, during which Izuku finally got the promised phone from his mother. It already came with his mom in the contacts, but approximately 2 seconds after turning it on, Izuku had gotten Ijiro's number. The new year brought some new changes to Izuku. His senseis at the dojo had given Izuku a set of graduation equipment, deeming him worthy of the title ninja. It was an event with as appropriately little fanfare, providing Izuku with a face shawl to hide his face, some smoke bombs, a set of sharpened kunai and shuriken, some ninja wire, and a disguise kit, complete with makeup and a wig, which Kirishima had called manly for having the guts to know how to use, and finally a laptop of all things so Izuku could continue to practice his coding, which would help with his hacking skills. Izuku had been extremely grateful for the gift and had promised to make good use of the items when he became a hero. Already he had plans for how to implement most of the materials into a kit for a possible future hero costume. When the day of young romances came along, Izuku had left his chocolate heart on his desk like he had the year before, but was surprised and discouraged when he arrived the following day to find his heart still sitting on his desk, and with no other heart in sight. It had been slightly discouraging, but perhaps the person who had left them those wonderful chocolates had already graduated. Putting away the chocolate heart he had worked on, he instead focused on his classes for the day. When classes were let out for the day, he split off from Kirishima, deciding to take advantage of the mild weather and walk home. As Izuku was beginning his trek home, another girl was finding her courage. She'd watched in the background the last few years, protected by the anonymity that came with being in another class. She'd never thought to have the confidence to confess her feelings, always choosing to write a short note to go along with the chocolate heart her dad had done his best to help her make. It wasn't anything fancy, and neither she nor dad thought they were the best chocolatiers around, but they'd made it work, somehow. Well, the first few attempts had been rather disastrous truthfully, and she chased off dad when she began to suspect sabotage so he could keep all the hearts they messed up. As if dad ever had needed a chocolate heart for her to express her love. Truthfully, neither of them expected her to develop a childhood crush, but there was something about Midoriya Izuku that just stood out. He was friendly and kind with everyone, humble about how awesome his quirk was, and he'd seen him showing karate moves to his friend Ijiro after school a couple of times, which was pretty kickass in her opinion. There was just a flux of understanding and kindness within the boy that had drawn her in. A crush, her dad had explained, looking solemn, as if he was losing someone precious to him before his gaze had turned fond instead. Our little girl has her first crush already, Suzume, he had said, looking to their shrine where a picture of her mother, who had gone missing shortly after her birth. No one knew what happened to her, and the case had long gone cold. Dad held out hope. Sometimes he would stop and look at her as if he was seeing a ghost, something she'd done bringing up bittersweet memories. As the years had gone by, she'd been content, admiring how Izuku would make everyone laugh and smile, dodging any attempts of his to discover who was the one leaving the chocolates. She was sure he knew that none of the girls in his class had left the chocolate. A lot of girls her age would squeal and blush about a boy they liked, but playing poker with dad meant she'd learned to keep up a mean poker face, and she did her best to ignore all the rumors. The only time anything had slipped by was when she'd gone to deliver her chocolate in the early morning, only to discover one waiting for her. She'd quickly hidden it in her backpack and had been slightly more nervous the rest of the day, thinking he'd found out something. The rumors in school said Midoriya could see everything with his ocular quirk, and she was worried he'd use it to find out she had the heart. However, he never confronted her. As she had read aloud the note he had left her, a determination had sprung over her. By next Valentine's Day she'd present her heart in person. She'd lost the confidence to approach him in the morning, spotting a dejected expression on his face when she'd passed by his desk in the morning. While he received plenty of complimentary chocolates from students in his class, perhaps he had missed not receiving her own. Thus this was her final shot. Soon the school year would end. Would she even see Midoriya again after this final semester? Already she could barely make him out, getting farther from the school. She was lucky he hadn't taken any turns on his walk home, or she'd surely have lost sight of him by now. She started to pedal her bike slowly at first, then building up speed. He needed to know. She needed to tell him. Her feet were a blur as she moved through the streets of Ichinomiya. Orange hair trailed behind her in that long ponytail she wore it in. It wasn't fancy by any means. Not having a mother figure growing up, she'd kept to a simple hairstyle. One that was easy to style in the morning and practical for everyday use. As the wind blew her hair back, she couldn't help but feel the rush of exhilaration, and she got closer to Midoriya. She let out a laugh that Midoriya seemingly heard as he tensed up, looking away from his phone. "Midoriya-san," she called out, a warning as she realized she was going fast. She hit the brakes and immediately tilted the bike left to drift it around as it slid. Wheels forward, while her leg kept her balanced and from toppling over. Midoriya hopped away just in time as she skidded by, a big grin on her face as she panted, looking at him with a determined look. Izuku hadn't expected a girl to call out his name on his walk home. He and Ijiro were usually the last ones left at school, and the school itself was pretty far away by now. He glanced back for a moment, eyes going wide as a girl his age was desperately trying to bring her bike to a stop. It was years of ninja training that allowed him to react quickly enough and move away as she performed a flawless Akira slide through the space he'd just been standing. Her face was flush as she steadied herself from the exertion of pedaling to catch up with him. Her orange hair, held up in a high ponytail on her left side, looked windswept and wild in a nice sort of way. It was reminiscent of how wild Izuku's hair could become at times. Her teal eyes stared at him with a determined expression. Although she wore the Daisher elementary school uniform, Izuku didn't recognize her straight away. Only vaguely recalling a few of the girls speaking with an organette in the halls before class on some occasions. However, the name of the Orangette hadn't been brought up in class, least of all around Izuku. While he was certainly friendly with the girls in his class, he by no means spent his time around them participating in school gossip, preferring the energetic conversations about heroes with Kirishima and the other boys. The girls seemed to know who he was though, so Izuku held his tongue while she caught her breath. "Midoriya-san, I wanted to ask if we could be friends," she said, her voice sounding nervous before she steeled her expression. Midoriya was, needless to say, very caught off guard. When he didn't immediately reply, the girl's face heated up slightly. "Sorry? I was too bold. It's just that. Well, I noticed you when you first started attending Daisher. Everyone says you're kind and want to be a hero, and I've even spotted you showing your friend, Kirishima-san, some karate moves after school. One of the girls overheard what you told Kirishima-san, about how people thought you were quirkless when you were little and how you had bullies at your old school. That was why I was surprised by how kind and humble you were with everyone. Despite how badly you'd been harmed before, it didn't put you down. You stayed positive and were always kind to everyone around you. Then, well, I'm not sure if you remember, but in 3rd grade you stopped those older girls from messing with Mimiko-chan. All the girls knew what was going on, but we didn't do anything. We were scared that they were turning on us and we could only sit back and watch. Then you found out and got the teachers involved. They made them stop and those bullies got sent away. That was when I started to like you. I would leave you those chocolates on your desk every Valentine's Day, never expecting anything in return. I felt pretty worthless about the whole bullying ordeal with Mimiko-chan. She needed help, but I kept quiet to stop anyone from hurting me. I knew I wasn't worthy enough to be your friend, but I still wanted to let you know how special you were to me," she said, a fond smile on her face. Izuku's face was also starting to heat up. He'd never had a girl speak to him like this. Sure, he'd heard gossip about how cute he was once, and his mom had called him handsome more than a few times, but that surely didn't count. Especially not when compared to the passionate speech being given now. Then, last year ago today, I went to place my chocolate on your desk like I had before and found one waiting for me. You believe in me despite never having known who I was, she continued, reaching into her bag and pulling out a large chocolate heart, before bowing and presenting the gift to Izuku. So I made a promise to myself then, that I would give this one in person. So please Midoriya-san. Let me be your friend. With shaky hands Midoriya accepted the well-made sweet. Looking from the design to the girl as if to confirm his findings. Yes, the heart matched the others, the only caveat being that the note on the package was different. From your not-so-secret admirer, Itsuka Kendo. He stared at the heart for another moment, before reaching into his pack and pulling out his own sweet, bowing and presenting his gift to her. Kendo took his gift, surprised to see that he'd gotten her another chocolate heart this year, before reading the note on the packaging. To my secret admirer, let's be friends. Izuku Midoriya. Izuku and Kendo ended up exchanging numbers and walking next to each other that day. They chose to spend their first day as friends at a local cafe. It was a rather date-like activity, at least that was what Izuku thought about it. Things were awkward at first. Izuku wasn't particularly sure about what to talk about with Kendo. They talked about their quirks at first, Izuku expressing how impressed he was with hers, even if Itsuka expressed she didn't think it was too useful. No way, if you can make your hands as big as you claim, you'll make an awesome pro. Your grapple techniques against villains would make you deadly, and transformation quirks like yours mean your hands are probably a lot more durable than the rest of your body. That means your punches are going to be super strong, a lot of villains won't expect the force you'll be dealing out. Plus, you can even use them for defense to keep the rest of your body safe. Moving wreckage with them would also, Izuku mumbled, causing Itsuka to gape for a few moments, then give him a fond smile. He had just broken down her quirk in seconds, analyzing a quirk she had thought had only simple applications and breaking it down for fierce ease. She sipped on her black coffee and just listened as Izuku rambled, not cutting him off but finding his enthusiasm rather cute. As he finally took a breath, seemingly only just realizing that he had expelled quite a bit of word vomit towards Izuku, Itsuka spoke. You're pretty awesome, Midoriya-kun. I always thought my quirk wasn't anything too impressive, but the way you talk about it, do you mean it? Can I be a great hero too? Of course you can, Kendo-chan. Izuku said, a mad blush from his earlier mumble epiphany, and by the fact that honorifics had suddenly become a lot more lax. I think anyone can if they put in the effort. My quirk came in late, and a lot of classmates at my old school didn't believe me when I said I was a late bloomer, but, even if I had been born quirkless, I would have wanted to be a hero. I heard about that. Everyone at school says you have some cool ocular quirk, but that it didn't come in until second grade, right? Itsuka asked, curious about the way Izuku's quirk worked. Oh, yeah. I call it dojutsu, my left eye is called Sharingan. It enhances how I perceive things, has predictive qualities, and lets me memorize everything it sees as if I had an eidetic memory. My Byakugan lets me see up to half a kilometer away in every direction, it can see through objects and even lets me see how a quirk flows through a person's body. I can also expel the quirk energy from my own body as an extra physical enhancement in a fight, letting me move a little bit more quickly and hit a bit harder, and if I channel the quirk energy in my hands correctly, I can also kind of counter out someone else's quirk temporarily, though I have to be careful because those strikes deal a lot of internal damage if I'm not careful, Izuku said, eager to talk about his quirk with someone else. Itsuka seemed to listen with avid attention, although there was obvious look at confusion at mentions of quirk pathway systems and quirk energy. That further led to more questions, and Izuku explained some more about his thoughts on quirk energy and quirk pathway systems. He was surprised by how easily Kendo kept up with the conversation, even introducing some new thoughts about it. Izuku was surprised just how much he enjoyed the conversation. Eventually their talk switched to what they had planned for the rest of the year. Izuku was a bit relieved to hear that she was going to Ichinomiya Middle School. While many of his classmates at Daisha were going to Ichinomiya Middle, he didn't know the first thing about advancing his relationship with a girl, and he figured it would only get more difficult if schools split them up. His relationship with Itsuka was still rather new, she'd only expressed her want of friendship, but the specially crafted hearts and her previous message of being his secret admirer suggested that she liked him a lot more than friends. Was this stop at the cafe an impromptu date then? He wasn't going to ask his mom about it, maybe Ijiro would know? Or perhaps Kamihara-sensei. After they discussed their quirks, they moved on to another discussion. Kendo-chan, what kind of heroes do you like? He asked, curious to see where she drew some of her inspirations for being a hero. Well, my favorite is Ryukyu. She's an awesome lady hero, super strong and pretty badass too. Then Mirko, of course. She's new to the scene but she's been climbing super fast, and she uses a quirk that not many people would think would be useful and takes it to the super cool extreme. Hawks is also amazing. He has a sense of ease about everything he does, you know? Like, it's not arrogance, but a sense of confidence that a lot of other heroes try to mimic by overcompensating in other areas, Itsuka said, eager to talk about her favorite heroes. Izuku could respect her choices. While Mirko wasn't a top 10 pro yet, at the rate she was climbing it wouldn't surprise him if she got there soon. Ryukyu's quirk was also super strong and was well liked by a lot of heroines. Yeah, those heroes are super awesome picks. I used to be a bit of an All Might fanboy, but I've developed a bit of an appreciation for Yoroi Musha and Ed Shot. Guess I have to blame my sensei for that. He's a huge fanboy, Izuku admitted. His Byakugan had unintentionally strayed to the hero collections his sensei had of the two heroes. His Yoroi Musha collection was impressive but nothing in comparison to his Ed Shot collection, every piece of which was personally signed by his Ed Shot. It looked like he had every piece of memorabilia that had come out for Ed Shot too, as there were some Izuku had heard about being only rumors in his collection. Your sensei? Do you practice martial arts as well? Itsuka asked him. Oh yeah, I do. My sensei is Kamihara Shin, he's my ninjutsu instructor. My Sharingan lets me pick up a lot of martial arts easily, but it's putting what I learn into practice that he's helped me out with. He's also taught me a lot about ninja history and methodology that I hope to put into use when I become a hero, Izuku admitted, noticing that Itsuka had lit up a bit as he talked about martial arts. That's so cool. I knew we had a ninjutsu dojo around here, but I had no idea it would help a ton with hero prep. I've only been going to a karate and boxing dojo so far, but soon I'll be going to Chiba City to Sujihara Mixed Martial Arts. It's a really good place to learn how to apply what you've learned and gain some experience, Itsuka explained, causing Izuku to give her a radiant grin. Sujihara? That's the one I was planning on going to as well. I recently graduated from Kamihara-sensei's dojo, and it's the one I've been looking at for a while now, Izuku admitted, causing Itsuka to give him a broad smile. It would seem Izuku would be seeing a lot more Itsuka in the coming years, and he was very happy about it. As the end of March came, so did Kirishima's moving day. Everything was packed into the moving van and ready to head out. The Midoriyas stopped by and gave the Kirishimas a send-off, both boys giving each other big hugs and tearful goodbyes. They promised to continue to stay in contact, easier than ever now that both of them had phones, and Kirishima promised that he'd try to convince his parents to let him take the train ride into Chiba City at least once a month when he could. Once goodbyes were said, and the Kirishimas had left, Inko gave his son a tight hug. Oh sweetie. I know you must feel crushed about Kirishima-kun leaving, but you'll still be brothers, and I've already arranged for Kirishima to come spend a week with us during the summer, Inko promised as she gave her son a tight hug. Midoriya wiped his tears away. While he was sad that the Kirishimas were leaving, he couldn't help but feel that there was a lot to be happy about too. He and Ijiro's bond was stronger than ever, and their friendship would last, Izuku was sure of it. He'd also made a new friend, or at least she was a girl who liked Izuku and who Izuku also kind of liked. Were they dating? That was still up in the air. So while his best friend had gone, he couldn't help but be excited for what the future brought them. Ijiro couldn't help but feel so isolated upon beginning his schooling at Mustafa. He kept in contact with Izaburo, but there were a lot of unfamiliar faces around. People didn't know him here like they did at Daisher. Everyone was super competitive about the amazingness of their quirks too. The teachers paid less attention to the students, letting them run wild and with little constraints. Sure, there was still organization, but only very serious matters involving quirk usage were even vaguely paid attention to. In middle school, popularity was the name of the game, and Kirishima was just too plain to really stand out and make a name for himself here. Everywhere he looked, people's eyes glazed over him. That confidence he'd had Daisher started to disappear fairly quickly as he realized that amongst his new peers, he was a nobody. Everyone would hang out with the people they had been with in elementary, and Kirishima, being one of the few to transfer in at the beginning of the year from a farther district, stood out quite a bit. He'd done his best to be kind, but middle school was a dog-eat-dog world that he hadn't been expecting. Thus, the calm and confident personality he developed with the help of Izuku started to erode into one that was meek and quiet. He slouched around all over the place at school, and as far as anyone else could tell, Kirishima was a loner. When you're the odd kid out, the world can be cruel. His peers started to call him plain, ordinary, and weird. He was the friendless nobody that no one wanted to hang out with, and people quickly learned to steer clear away from him because of it. Ijiro started counting the minutes in the day until school ended, desperate to leave and rush home. Outside of school, he kept up a mask of usual confidence. It was surprisingly easy. His parents were a lot busier now. Dad's new job came with new responsibilities, and he'd often get home late from work, tired and ready to sleep and repeat. His mother had decided to get a lot more involved in going to the gym, noticing her figure was starting to worsen as she got older. In the process, she'd made some new friends that had kept her busy and out of the house as well. If his parents noticed anything strange about the mask he wore, they never brought it up. The only time that Kirishima found himself happy was when he was about to take the train ride up to Chiba City to meet Izuku after his dojo practice. At first, it had been just him meeting Izuku. The two would hang out and go to the arcade and talk about everything. Izuku had asked some probing questions about how his new school was, and Kirishima only admitted that it was some getting used to, especially with it being a new district, before deflecting the question and asking about Izuku's newfound relationship. Because, yeah, his bro had a girlfriend. She was pretty badass, so Ijiro approved. Apparently she could keep up with Izuku in a hand-to-hand fight if quirks weren't on the table. Oh sure, the two of them danced around the subject plenty of times, but Ijiro wasn't sure why. Izuku had admitted to having gone on a date with her, and they were inseparable from the gossip Ijiro had picked up from a few other friends who had gone to Daisha and were now going to Ichinomiya Middle School. Izuku had even admitted that they'd exchange acknowledgement of feelings, ergo he had a girlfriend. Izuku had blushed but been adamant that they were still getting to know each other and hadn't developed that far along. Kirishima had to struggle to not roll his eyes at that statement. He'd only talked with Itsuka a couple of times and it was evident she was head over heels. It just seemed their unfamiliarity with relationships was the only thing halting progression. Thankfully he was able to maintain that mask around Izuku. He'd received suspicious glances, but considering Kirishima was the happiest around his brother, it was hard to tell that he was in a slump, even for Izuku. The summer visit with the Midoriyas was a welcome break from the troubles at school, and he even got to visit for Christmas since his parents were going to a dinner party being held by Dad's boss. When the new school year started, there was more pressure to succeed academically, so Kirishima flung himself into academics. He was able to make some new friends in the school year. The younger students, being initially unaware about school social groups, had allowed him to make buddies with some guys who liked to hit up the local arcade on occasion and talk about comics. It had been nice to be part of a friend group, but the students Kirishima's age still went out of their way to ignore him and make passive-aggressive comments about how he wouldn't stand out as a hero with such a plain quirk. Middle school was tough on Kirishima, but he was doing his best to keep at it, finding comfort in his late-night talks with Izuku and the occasional visits to Chiba City. The third year of middle school brought a new surprise into Kirishima's life that he hadn't been expecting. A pink-skinned girl with pink hair and an acid quirk took the school by storm when she transferred in for her final year before high school. She was so happy and confident about everything that Kirishima couldn't help but look up to her a bit. Her high energy and intolerance towards school bullies made her pretty manly. Even the people who would look down on his quirk and his goals for UA started leaving him alone. Kirishima's dream of UA had been strong ever since meeting Izuku and promising to go there in high school to be heroes. He had the grades. As a kid, Izuku had even convinced Kirishima that he had a great quirk for hero work. Whenever someone commented on his quirk, Ijiro would always think back to that first meeting with Izuku. How strongly his bro had believed in his quirk for hero work. It was what let him walk away from those comments. However, his self-doubt had crawled back into his life, and seeing the new girl Mina Ashido school bullies and protect her friend in the face of a vast shady figure, had almost made him wonder if he could still be a hero. Izuku sat in a small cafe he'd managed to find in Chiba City. It was a nice place he'd visited plenty of times before with Itsuka. The decorations were plain, but it had a more personal feel than going to a Starbucks. The use of incense gave the plain decorations a very comfy, at-home feeling that was reflected in the clientele. People weren't rushing through to get their drink and leave, they were taking their time, talking with the workers or other guests, and sitting down to enjoy their drinks. He couldn't help but smile and look down at the warm mug of hot cocoa he'd ordered. Coffee was never his favorite. It kept him up too late, and when you have an ocular-based quirk, straining the eyes unnecessarily was usually bad in the long term. Over the last couple of years at Ichinomiya Middle School, life had been pretty great for him. He was recognized by a lot of students who couldn't afford a private education and had funneled there from Daisha Elementary School. Thankfully, he and Itsuka even shared the same homeroom class. The teachers were very friendly and accommodating, and the general attitude of the school was very reflective of small-town life. There was never a rush of boasting, just the general awkwardness of meeting some new people and getting to know your peers and their goals. Izuku had made some new friends, but none had developed the same connection with him as his friendship with Ijiro. He spent his afternoons regularly with Itsuka, feeling helplessly drawn in. Her smile was contagious, she was always so energetic. Izuku privately blamed the coffee she drank black. She wasn't afraid to tussle and get dirty, the number of times she'd put him in the dirt during a spar bringing a fond smile to his face. Itsuka hated when someone looked down on her as well, a lesson Izuku had quickly learned when he'd hesitated in their first couple of spars. Never again. When the two of them weren't sparring or studying, they were spending time at her dad's auto shop. Mr. Kendo was a nice man. He'd taken one look at Izuku's clueless face when asked if he knew anything about cars, and had shown him the ropes. "My daughter ain't dating a kid who can't work with cars," had been his only response, and it had sent both Izuku and Itsuka into a blushing spree. Thankfully, Mr. Kendo didn't go out of his way to embarrass Izuku and was quite accommodating in teaching him about machinery. While not the first male role model in Izuku's life, Izuku still greatly respected what he was doing. With Izuku's dad having died when he was younger, there hadn't been another man to teach him about these kinds of things. Kamihara-sensei and Shinya-sensei, while his sensei had only shown him a few things about cars, mostly how to break into them without making it obvious that they had been broken into. A villain can leave a lot of important info in vehicles, you should at least know how to get into one and snoop around it properly. Changing the oil, running maintenance on a vehicle, and even building an engine with Itsuka for her future motorbike were all things Izuku wouldn't have thought to have enjoyed before, but he had slowly found himself turning into a grease monkey. Mr. Kendo had even shown him how to drive on a private track, of course, definitely not an abandoned parking lot. His time at Tsujihara Mixed Martial Arts wasn't as instructional as Izuku had initially hoped. Tendo Wami was a good sensei, but that was it. He'd helped Izuku polish up a bit on group fighting, but he wanted Izuku in the competition ring the moment he'd seen him fight. It was actually kind of annoying. After a few months of going, he stopped and decided to continue training with Kamihara-sensei at his dojo instead. Itsuka had been a bit disappointed, but she was naturally more competitive than Izuku and kept at it. He would escort her to Tsujihara's every weekend, wait around in the city while she practiced, and then they'd either walk around the city or head back home. This was one of the occasions he was waiting for Itsuka to exit from Tsujihara. The mid-February weather was still a bit chilly, but Chiba City didn't usually get snow in the winter, and today wasn't an exception. There was a brisk winter wind blowing through though that had made Izuku wrap himself up in warm clothes, and then been given Itsuka's scarf to wear while she did her training. A quick peck on the cheek and she'd been off into the dojo, leaving Izuku with a goofy grin on his face on the walk to the cafe, surprised to find her teal scarf almost matched his outfit. Was that on purpose? Yeah, okay, maybe he and Itsuka were dating. How to bring it up though? Did he even need to? Would she mind just dropping the word girlfriend in a casual conversation? There was something else Izuku had been feeling as he took a quick sip of his, still too hot to drink, cocoa. Relief. Izuku had received word that his written exam scores for the U.A entrance exam had been very impressive, and he'd been invited to partake in the practical exam for the hero course on the 26th of February. Itsuka had also passed her exams, and he was just waiting to hear from Ijiro to see if he'd done well on his written exam too. That was his whole reason for waiting in the cafe to begin with. The chime of the bell by the establishment's entrance let Izuku know the person he'd been waiting for was there. Ijiro Kirishima came in bundled up in a big black and red jacket. The bottom of his jeans looked a little waterlogged, like he'd taken a step into a puddle almost, and he was wearing a beanie over his head that left just a couple of strands of black hair poking out. "Hey bro," Ijiro said with a grin. In his hands he was holding a sealed letter, waving it around excitedly. "Eiji bro, it's been too long. Come on, let's see those results," Izuku replied, and noticing that Kirishima had a tad bit of hesitance on his face at that comment, continued with, "Come on man, I'm sure you passed." Kirishima quickly ordered a latte before taking a seat next to Izuku, a hint of nervousness in his eyes. Izuku had seen that bit of nervousness constantly in his friend's eyes lately, but he'd always been deflected away whenever he had asked. Izuku watched as Kirishima took the envelope and opened it up, pulling out the letter from inside. Taking a deep breath, he read through the letter carefully, a look of relief coming into his eyes as he finished. "Looks like I passed. My practical is on the 26th, same as you and Itsuka," Kirishima said, a sigh of relief escaping his mouth at those words. "Told you those study sessions were worth it," Izuku said, voice rising in excitement as he proclaimed, "We're just one step closer to being a hero." Kirishima gave Izuku a strange smile. "Izabro, I don't know if I'm hero material," he admitted, causing Izuku to stop in his celebrations and give Kirishima a questioning stare. "Ijiro, where is this coming from? You passed the written exam, it's just the practical left. Of course you can be an awesome hero?" Izuku insisted, forgetting about his hot cocoa for now. Yeah, I passed, but look, I haven't been honest with you about Mustafa. The kids there think my quirk is too plain and boring for hero work. I know you think it's awesome, but it sometimes feels like you're the only one in a sea of voices telling me differently. It's been messing with my confidence. I freeze up instead of helping out when I see students getting bullied now. Heck, a couple of months ago I just watched while this super big villain-looking dude was scaring my classmates. I didn't do anything, I was just too scared. Instead, I watched while one of the girls he was bothering had to stand up to him and get him to go away. Heroes aren't supposed to be scared, we need to be courageous and manly, Kirishima said, a guilty expression coming over his face as he looked down at the table, holding his latte listlessly in his hands to keep them warm and feeling like an utter failure despite the good news about the practical. Izuku sat there, quiet and feeling a bit guilty himself. He hadn't realized just how hard Ijiro had it at Mustafa. It made him angry that he hadn't bothered to check in more often if he had been having such a hard time. Ijiro bro. You're wrong, being a hero isn't about not being scared. It's acting despite your fear. Those classmates that had to deal with that big villain, do you think that they weren't scared? She must have been terrified if this villain was scary enough to get you to back down, but she put aside her fear and stood up to the villain. Ijiro, you're going to be an awesome hero one day, so stand tall and face that fear and insecurity like a man. Izuku said, voice slightly harsh but knowing that this was what had to be said to get Ijiro out of his funk. He had to duck his head in embarrassment when he noticed a few other guests were now giving the two curious looks. Ijiro smiled at Izuku, though it was strained. I hear you bro, it'll take some time to get that through my head, Kirishima admitted, glad when Izuku gave his shoulder a pat in comfort. Take as long as you need, man. Just remember, no matter what anyone else says, you're going to be an awesome hero? Izuku insisted. Kirishima looked a little happier after that, and Izuku hoped that his friend had taken his words to heart. They enjoyed their drinks together, talking about what they expected the practical exam to be like. Izuku had done some internet sleuthing and had found a few forums where people who had taken the previous year's practical examinations were complaining about how unfair they were. It seemed like they'd had to fight some faux villain robots, but that didn't seem right to Izuku. There had to be more to the exam than just fighting robots. Not every quirk was geared toward battle after all. Maybe they give points for manly actions? Kirishima asked, eyes bright as his friend thought of the implication. Izuku meanwhile, almost sweat drop at Ijiro's pondering. What do you mean by that? He asked, sure he was about to hear something about how brave you were as you took down a villain robot. Well, it's pretty manly to protect others and help out when people are struggling. So maybe they give some points for that? Ijiro suggested. Izuku stopped and pondered that himself. You know, I think that makes a lot of sense. Heroes are more than just punching villains. They need to be able to protect others. There will likely be people who don't have good battle-oriented quirks in the practical. They need to be able to gain points somehow. Maybe by causing distractions so another examinee can take down a villain bot, or perhaps dragging another examinee away if they get defeated by one. I haven't found any information that doesn't say we can't work with others. While I doubt they'll put people from the same school district in the same test site, maybe you can convince another examinee to work with you to take down a villain bot. Izubro mumblestorm, Ijiro chimed in helpfully, causing Izuku to turn into a blushing, stuttering mess, and Kirishima to burst out into a friendly laugh. Soon enough their drinks were finished up, and they returned to Sujihara to pick up Itsuka. She had a light sweat sheen going on still but was ecstatic to hear that Kirishima was also going to be attending the practical. That's great to hear. We're all one step closer to you. Her exclamation brought a smile to both boys' faces, and they decided to spend the day together at a local arcade to celebrate. Izuku felt immensely pleased when he managed to win enough tickets for a large Ryukyu plush that he'd noticed Itsuka glancing at while they played games. The plush featured Ryukyu in her dragon form and was kind of adorable looking, the proportions purposefully off to enhance its cute factor. Best boyfriend ever, Itsuka said happily as she hugged Izuku, and then a quick kiss on the lips, being brief since they were in public. While Izuku did blush, for once he didn't refute the teasing Ijiro gave him about being Itsuka's boyfriend. Something which seemed to make Itsuka a lot happier as well apparently. It helped that Ijiro was giving Izuku a thumbs up and congratulations whenever Itsuka wasn't looking. Eventually the three teens went their separate ways. Izuku and Itsuka had to return to Ichinomiya while Kirishima had a long train ride back to Shizuoka. All three felt that whatever the future held, they were ready to face the practical exam. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through What If Deku Unlocked the Power of Sharingan. I hope you found it as intriguing and thought-provoking as we did. A big shout out to Targetedandfiring for crafting such a compelling story. Don't forget to check out their profile on Archive of Our Own for more amazing works. The link is in the description below. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to What If Deku 2.0 for more fascinating explorations into the world of fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we're always excited to hear your thoughts and suggestions in the comments section. See you guys in the next video.